My wife seated me behind a pillar at her sister's wedding. Everyone pretended I wasn't family. Then a stranger sat beside me and said, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." When she stood to speak, everyone turned. My wife stopped smiling. "Look, I'm not saying I expected a parade when I married into the Ashford family, but I at least thought I'd get treated like an actual human being instead of some kind of domesticated houseplant they kept around for decorative purposes." My wife Clara, beautiful, ambitious, and perpetually concerned with what other people thought about literally everything, had this magical way of describing events that made them sound way better than they actually were. So when she told me her sister's wedding would be just a family thing, I figured, cool, maybe some awkward small talk with her uncle who always asked me about sports I didn't watch, a few glasses of overpriced wine, and we'd be home by 10. Simple, easy, survivable. What I didn't expect was to be treated like the help who forgot to use the service entrance. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which I only remember because it was the same day my biggest client decided to ghost me for 3 weeks before magically reappearing with creative notes that basically meant starting over from scratch. The envelope was thick, like unnecessarily thick, the kind of thick that screamed, "We spent more money on this piece of cardstock than you spend on groceries in a month." Cream-colored, obviously, because white would have been too pedestrian for the Ashfords. And there it was, embossed in gold foil that probably required the sacrifice of at least one graphic designer's sanity. Mr. and Mrs. Blake Monroe. I stared at it for a solid minute, feeling that weird mix of validation and dread that comes with being acknowledged by people who usually pretend you're part of the furniture. Clara snatched it from my hands before I could even process the calligraphy, squealing like she'd just won the lottery instead of receiving an invitation to an event she'd known about for 8 months. "Oh my God, Blake, look how beautiful this is." Naomi really went all out. "It's an invitation, babe, not the Mona Lisa." She shot me that look, the one that said I was being deliberately difficult just by existing in my natural state of not caring about fancy paper. "This is important to my family. To me. Can you at least pretend to be excited?" "Sure. Excited." That's exactly what I felt about spending an entire weekend with people who treated me like I was one moderately bad quarter away from asking them for money. The Ashfords lived for this kind of thing, big events where everyone could show off their best behavior, their best outfits, and their best humble brags about vacation homes and investment portfolios. It was like watching a live-action performance of a social media feed, except everyone's algorithm was set to insufferable. We'd been married 3 years at that point, which is apparently the exact amount of time it takes for your in-laws to stop pretending they like you. In the beginning, Clara's mother, Patricia, a woman whose face hadn't moved since 2019 thanks to a very dedicated dermatologist, used to introduce me as the lucky one at family gatherings. Like I'd won some kind of cosmic lottery by marrying her daughter. Which, don't get me wrong, Clara was great. Smart, driven, gorgeous in that effortless way that made other women hate her a little bit. But after 3 years of watching me run my small architecture firm in Denver without becoming the next Frank Lloyd Wright, Patricia's script had changed. Now I was still figuring things out, which was rich people code for not rich enough. My firm was fine. Not spectacular, not tanking, just fine. We did residential projects mostly, a few small commercial gigs when we got lucky. I had 3 employees, an office that didn't smell like mold, and enough clients to keep the lights on and pay Clara's credit card bills when her designer phase kicked in, which was always. The woman could find a reason to buy a $400 throw pillow faster than I could say we already have pillows. When Naomi, Clara's younger sister and the bride-to-be, got engaged to some finance bro named Preston who definitely owned a boat he couldn't operate, I did what any decent brother-in-law would do. I sent a congratulations text. Nothing fancy, just a, "Hey, congrats on the engagement. Happy for you guys," with one of those little champagne emojis, because I'm not a complete barbarian. Her response? A thumbs-up emoji. That's it. Not even the enthusiastic thumbs-up with the sparkles, or whatever. Just the basic, default, "I've acknowledged your existence, but couldn't be bothered to type actual words, thumbs up." That should have been my first clue that this wedding was going to be a disaster with a dress code. The second red flag came about 2 weeks before the big day, when I made the catastrophic mistake of asking a reasonable question. Clara was in the bathroom doing something complicated with her hair that involved at least 4 different products and a curling iron that cost more than my first car. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her in the mirror. Hey, so where am I sitting at the ceremony? She didn't even pause mid-curl. Oh, I think Mom's handling the seating arrangements. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, like I'd just swallowed an ice cube made of pure dread. Your mom is handling where I sit. Yeah, she's really good at that kind of thing. Very organized. Clara, your mom once tried to seat me at the kids' table during Thanksgiving. That was a mistake. There was a mix-up with the place cards. I was 34 years old. She finally looked at me, setting down the curling iron with an exasperated sigh that suggested I was being unreasonable for remembering the time I'd been placed between her 9-year-old cousin and a high chair. Blake, can you please not make this difficult? It's Naomi's day. Everything needs to be perfect. Perfect. Right. Because nothing says perfect like making sure your sister's husband knows exactly where he ranks in the family hierarchy, which was apparently somewhere between distant acquaintance and guy who might steal the silverware. But I nodded, because 3 years of marriage had taught me that sometimes you pick your battles, and sometimes you just accept that you're going to lose anyway, so you might as well save your energy for the open bar. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur of Clara stress testing every outfit she owned, asking my opinion, and then completely ignoring it when I gave it. Does this dress make me look washed out? No, you look great. I knew it, I looked terrible. This happened roughly 47 times. I stopped offering feedback by day 3 and just started nodding supportively while thinking about literally anything else. Work deadlines, whether we needed milk, that one episode of The Twilight Zone with the gremlin on the airplane wing. The night before we left for the wedding, Clara had her entire side of our walk-in closet spread across our bed like a fabric bomb had detonated. I can't decide between the navy dress and the rose one. What do you think? The navy one, I said, because it was closer to me and I was tired. Really? You don't think it's too formal? It's a wedding. Formal is kind of the point. She held up the rose dress, tilting her head like she was decoding ancient hieroglyphics. But this one photographs better. And there it was. The real consideration. Not comfort, not what she actually liked, but what would look good in the inevitable 75 photos that would be posted, tagged, filtered, and analyzed by everyone in her social circle like they were studying the Zapruder film. I wanted to say something about how maybe, just maybe, she should wear what made her happy instead of what would get the most likes, but I was smart enough to know that conversation would end with me sleeping on the couch. Wear the rose one then, I said, hoping this would end the fashion crisis. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're right. The navy one is perfect." I gave up trying to understand. As I packed my own bag, which took approximately 7 minutes because men's formal wear is blessedly simple, I couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend was going to be memorable for all the wrong reasons. Call it intuition, call it pattern recognition from 3 years of Ashford family events. But something told me that cream-colored invitation with its stupid gold foil was less of a welcome and more of a warning shot. I just didn't know how right I was. The resort where Naomi decided to get married looked like someone had taken a Pinterest board called Rich People Mountain Fantasies and made it real with unlimited funding and absolutely no concern for budget constraints. We're talking about the kind of place that had a circular driveway made of actual cobblestones, valet parking attendants in uniforms that were probably dry clean only, and a lobby that smelled like expensive candles and generational wealth. The whole place screamed, if you have to ask about prices, you can't afford to be here. Which was ironic considering I was pretty sure Preston's parents were footing the bill for most of this extravaganza, and they'd made their fortune doing something with hedge funds that I didn't understand and was pretty sure was partially illegal. I pulled our car up to the entrance, a sensible Audi that Clara had picked out because it was sophisticated but not showy, which really meant expensive enough that people know we have money, but not so expensive that people think we're trying too hard, and immediately felt underdressed despite wearing my best charcoal suit. The one I'd bought for our own wedding, actually, which had somehow survived 3 years without Clara suggesting I replace it with something more contemporary. It fit well, made me look like I had my life together, and most importantly, didn't make me look like I was trying to cosplay as a groomsman for a royal wedding. The fact that it had made it this far without being deemed unacceptable was honestly a minor miracle. Clara looked absolutely stunning, which was both a blessing and a curse. Blessing because, hey, I got to walk in with a woman who turned heads. Curse because when Clara looked that good, I basically became invisible, like one of those optical illusions where you can either see the vase or the faces, but not both. She'd gone with the rose dress, naturally, because nothing I said ever actually mattered in these decisions, and she'd done something complicated with her hair that probably required YouTube tutorials and the patience of a saint. She looked radiant. The kind of radiant that makes photographers follow you around and other women simultaneously compliment you and hate you a little bit. The kind of radiant that makes husbands disappear entirely. We hadn't even made it through the lobby before Clara spotted her mother holding court near the concierge desk, surrounded by what I assumed were various aunts and cousins who all had the same highlights and the same ability to smile without their eyes participating. Oh my God, there's Mom. I need to go say hi. Blake, can you grab our bags from the car? The valet is literally taking the car right now, I said, watching our Audi disappear around the corner with a kid who looked about 19 and definitely knew how to drive stick better than I did. Well, check us in then. I'll meet you at the room. Love you. She kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted peck that felt more like muscle memory than affection, and then she was gone, practically speed-walking across the marble floor in heels that cost more than my monthly health insurance premium. I watched her get absorbed into the cluster of Ashford women, all of them air-kissing and compliments that sounded sincere, but definitely weren't. I stood there for a moment, alone in a lobby full of wedding guests who all seemed to know each other, holding Clara's designer purse because she'd shoved it at me before disappearing. Cool. Great. This was going exactly how I'd imagined. Check-in took forever because apparently our room reservation had been made under Patricia's account, which meant I had to explain 3 separate times that yes, I was supposed to be here, no, I wasn't crashing the wedding, and yes, I was actually married to Clara Ashford Monroe, even though the hyphenated last name only appeared on her social media and literally nowhere else. The desk clerk, a young woman with immaculate patience and a name tag that said Jennifer, finally found our reservation and handed me 2 key cards with an apologetic smile that suggested she dealt with families like the Ashfords regularly and had developed impressive coping mechanisms. Our room was nice, I'll give them that. Mountain view, king bed with approximately 47 decorative pillows that would immediately be thrown on the floor, and a bathroom with one of those rain shower heads that made regular showers feel like disappointments. I texted Clara to let her know which room we were in and got back a thumbs up, which apparently was the family's preferred method of communication when they couldn't be bothered with actual words. I changed into my suit, checked myself in the mirror to make sure I looked like someone who deserved to be at this wedding, and headed down to the ceremony area. The event coordinator had sent out a detailed schedule that broke down the entire weekend into 15-minute increments, like we were all attending a corporate retreat instead of a celebration of love. According to the itinerary, I had 45 minutes before the ceremony started, which gave me plenty of time to find my seat and contemplate my life choices. The ceremony space was set up outside on this massive lawn that overlooked the mountains, and I had to admit, it was gorgeous. Rows and rows of white chairs with those fancy covers that made them look less like folding chairs and more like miniature thrones. Flowers everywhere, and I mean everywhere, in arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. There was a string quartet set up near the altar, playing something classical that I didn't recognize, but made me feel simultaneously cultured and poor. The whole setup looked like it belonged in a magazine spread titled Weddings That Will Make You Feel Bad About Your Life. I wandered toward the seating area, looking for the section where family was supposed to sit, figuring I'd be somewhere near the front since, I was married to the maid of honor. That's when I saw the place cards, each one written in the same elaborate calligraphy as the invitation, each one positioned with the kind of precision that suggested someone had used a ruler and possibly a protractor. I found mine pretty quickly because my name basically jumped out at me like a neon sign in a dark alley. Blake Monroe. Row 12. I counted. Front row, row 2, row 3, yeah, row 12. Behind a decorative pillar that was, I'm sure, described as rustic and charming in the planning documents, but was really just a convenient way to block the view of anyone unfortunate enough to be seated behind it. I was positioned perfectly to see absolutely nothing except the back of said pillar, and maybe, if I leaned significantly to the left, a partial view of what I assumed would be the ceremony. I stood there staring at my name card, waiting for the punchline, expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Just kidding." But no, this was real. This was my actual assigned seat. Row 12, behind a pillar, next to what appeared to be one of those industrial outdoor fans they'd set up to keep guests cool, which meant I'd spend the entire ceremony listening to the gentle hum of circulating air while missing all the important moments everyone else got to witness. I picked up the card, turned it over, checked to see if maybe there was a mistake, if maybe this was meant for Blake Miller or Blake whoever from Preston's side of the family. Nope. Blake Monroe, married to Clara Ashford Monroe, seated in social Siberia. I actually laughed. Out loud. Standing there by myself in row 12 behind the pillar, I laughed, because what else could I do? Get angry? Cause a scene? Demand better seating like some kind of wedding diva? That would just confirm everything Patricia probably already thought about me. That I was difficult, ungrateful, not good enough for her daughter. Guess I'm the emotional support husband, I muttered to myself, sliding the name card back into its little silver holder. At least I was near the fan. It was going to be hot out here. All these people in formal were pretending they weren't sweating through their expensive fabrics. Silver lining and all that. I sat down in my assigned chair, which was exactly as uncomfortable as it looked, and pulled out my phone, figuring I might as well catch up on emails while I waited for this circus to start. I had a few messages from the office, one from my mom asking how the wedding was going. I didn't have the heart to tell her I was being treated like an uninvited guest at my own sister-in-law's wedding. And absolutely nothing from Clara, who was presumably still locked in the bridesmaid's suite doing whatever bridesmaids do before ceremonies. Probably drinking champagne, talking about how perfect everything was, and carefully not mentioning where they'd seated their various husbands. Other guests started filtering in, dressed in their wedding best, finding their seats and making small talk about the weather and the venue, and how beautiful everything looked. A few people glanced at me sitting alone in row 12, and I could see the questions forming. Who is this guy? Why is he sitting back there? Is he even supposed to be here? I smiled politely, nodded when appropriate, and tried to look like someone who totally chose to sit behind a pillar and definitely wasn't experiencing a slow-motion crisis about his marriage and his place in his wife's family. The string quartet shifted into something that sounded important and processional, which meant things were about to start. I adjusted my tie, checked my phone one more time for messages that hadn't arrived, and settled in for what I was certain would be a lovely ceremony that I wouldn't be able to see. At least the fan was nice. The ceremony was officially starting, which I could tell not from actually seeing anything useful, but from the sudden collective rustle of expensive fabric as everyone stood up and turned to watch the procession. From my premium seating location behind what I'd now mentally dubbed the Pillar of Shame, I had an excellent view of absolutely nothing except decorative stonework and the left shoulder of a man in row 11 who apparently bathed in cologne strong enough to violate the Geneva Convention. The fan next to me hummed along like it was providing the world's most depressing soundtrack to my exile. I stood up because that's what you do at weddings, even when you're essentially attending from the parking lot, metaphorically speaking. I could hear the music swelling, could hear the collective intake of breath that meant someone important was walking down the aisle, could hear the whispers and the camera shutters clicking like a swarm of very expensive locusts. But could I see any of it? Absolutely not. I was basically attending this wedding via audio description. That's when someone sat down next to me, during the processional, while everyone else was standing. This person just dropped into the chair beside mine like they were settling in to watch Netflix, not witness the sacred union of Naomi Ashford and Preston, whatever his last name was. I glanced over and did a double take that probably wasn't subtle at all. She was maybe mid-30s, wearing this sleek emerald dress that somehow looked both elegant and like she could run a Fortune 500 company in it, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't spent 3 hours on it, but still looked perfect. She had this confidence that radiated off her like heat, the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without even realizing you were doing it. And she was looking at me with this amused smile that suggested she knew exactly how ridiculous this whole situation was. "You look like you've been banished," she whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something subtle and probably expensive, not at all like the chemical warfare happening in row 11. "Want company?" I couldn't help it. I smirked. Here I was, having possibly the worst wedding experience of my life, and this complete stranger had somehow diagnosed my entire situation in one sentence. Only if you brought snacks. I brought sarcasm, she said, settling more comfortably into her chair while everyone else remained standing. Watching the ceremony we couldn't see. Works better. Lasts longer. 0 calories. Sold, I said. I'm Blake. Sophie. She extended her hand like we were at a business meeting instead of committing the social sin of sitting during a wedding processional. I shook it, noting that her handshake was firm and confident, the kind that said she'd probably negotiated her way out of situations way worse than bad wedding seating. So what did you do to deserve row 12 behind the architectural inconvenience? Got married to the bride's sister, I said, watching her eyebrows rise in genuine surprise. Apparently that earns you a spot somewhere between forgotten cousin and person who might steal the centerpieces. Brutal, Sophie said, and she actually sounded impressed by the audacity of it. I'm here because a client was supposed to bring me as his +1 to do some networking, and he bailed last minute. But he already paid for my hotel room, and I had nothing better to do this weekend. So here I am, crashing a wedding I have 0 connection to and sitting behind a pillar with the groom's exiled brother-in-law. That's either really sad or really funny, I said. It's both. That's what makes it perfect. Everyone finally sat down as the officiant started talking, his voice carrying over the sound system they'd set up. I could hear him just fine. Could hear every word about love and commitment and 2 souls becoming one. But I still couldn't see anything except the back of that pillar, and now, thankfully, Sophie, who was providing running commentary in whispers that were just quiet enough not to disturb anyone, but just loud enough for me to hear. Wait, is that the bride? She whispered, leaning toward me. I literally can't see anything. This pillar is offensive. Welcome to my world, I murmured back. And yeah, probably. Unless they're doing some kind of bait-and-switch situation. Would explain the seating arrangement. Maybe they're hiding you from the real bride. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. There was something about Sophie's complete irreverence for the whole situation that was incredibly liberating. She didn't know these people, didn't care about their opinions, and wasn't invested in maintaining the careful social performance that everyone else seemed committed to. She was just here, making jokes, treating this whole expensive production like the absurd theater it kind of was. The officiant continued his speech about love and partnership, hitting all the standard wedding cliches with the enthusiasm of someone who'd definitely given this same speech at least 40 times before. Sophie leaned closer, her shoulder touching mine. Okay, here's what we're going to do. When he asks everyone to rise for the vows, we're going to stand up, and you're going to pretend we're together. I looked at her, certain I'd misheard. What? Trust me, she said, and there was something in her eyes. Mischief, maybe, or just the pure chaotic energy of someone who decided to make their own entertainment. Follow my lead. Sophie, I don't think. Do you want to spend this entire ceremony being invisible, or do you want to have some fun? She had a point. A really good point, actually. I'd already been relegated to the worst seat in the house, already been essentially erased from my own family's event. What did I have to lose by playing along with whatever Sophie had planned? My dignity. Pretty sure that had been checked at the door when I found my name card in row 12. Fine, I said. But if this goes badly, I'm blaming you. Deal, Sophie said, grinning like she'd just won something. The officiant's voice rose slightly, taking on that performative quality that meant something important was about to happen. At this time, I'd like to ask all our guests to please rise as Naomi and Preston exchanged their vows. The collective rustling started again as everyone stood. Sophie stood too. And then she did something I absolutely did not expect. She reached over and took my hand. Not tentatively, not awkwardly, but confidently, threading her fingers through mine like we'd done this 1,000 times before. Her hand was warm, her grip firm, and suddenly we weren't 2 strangers hiding behind a pillar anymore. We looked like a couple. A couple who chose to sit in row 12, sure, but a couple nonetheless. I should have pulled away, should have laughed it off, made it clear this was ridiculous. But I didn't. Maybe it was the absurdity of the whole situation, or maybe it was just nice to feel like I was part of something instead of an afterthought, but I squeezed her hand back. And that's when I saw Clara. She was standing up at the front with the other bridesmaids, holding a bouquet that probably cost more than my suit, and she was looking directly at me. Or more accurately, she was looking at me holding hands with a woman in an emerald dress who definitely wasn't her. I watched in real time as my wife's face went through a journey of emotions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something that looked suspiciously like anger mixed with shock. Her perfectly composed expression, the one she'd probably been practicing in the mirror for weeks, cracked just slightly. Her smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed. And for the first time since we'd arrived at this stupid resort, Clara Ashford Monroe looked genuinely affected by my presence. Sophie must have noticed my reaction because she leaned in, still holding my hand, and whispered, "Is that her? The sister?" "No," I said quietly. "That's my wife." Sophie's grin got wider. "Oh, this is even better than I thought." Several other people had noticed our joined hands by now. I could see heads turning slightly, could feel the weight of attention shifting toward row 12 like we'd suddenly become interesting. An older woman 2 rows ahead actually turned around fully, her eyes traveling from our linked hands up to our faces, her expression suggesting she was already composing the text message she'd send to her friends about the drama she'd witnessed. The bridesmaids were definitely noticing. One of them, I think it was Clara's cousin Michelle, leaned over and whispered something to Clara, who responded without breaking eye contact with me. If looks could kill, I'd have been dead 3 times over. But here's the thing. I didn't let go of Sophie's hand. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was childish. Maybe it was 3 years of being treated like an accessory, finally boiling over into one moment of rebellion. Or maybe it was just really, really satisfying to finally be seen. The officiant continued with the vows, Naomi and Preston probably saying something beautiful and meaningful, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I was too busy having a silent standoff with my wife across 50 feet of lawn and 11 rows of designer-clad wedding guests. Sophie squeezed my hand slightly, a gesture that felt like solidarity, like she was saying, "I've got your back," without words. When the couple finally finished their vows and everyone sat back down, Sophie released my hand slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone who was watching saw that we'd been holding hands by choice, not accident. She settled back into her chair and leaned toward me. "So," she whispered, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how much trouble are you in?" I thought about the look on Clara's face, about the conversation we'd inevitably have later, about how this moment would probably be dissected and analyzed by her entire family before the reception even started. 11, I said. "Definitely 11. Sophie smiled. "Good. That means we're doing it right." The ceremony continued in all its overly orchestrated glory, and I have to say, watching a wedding you can barely see while sitting next to a woman who just helped you commit social terrorism is a surprisingly entertaining experience. The officiant had moved on from the vows to that part where he talks about the sacred bond of marriage like he's narrating a nature documentary about endangered species, his voice dripping with the kind of artificial gravitas that suggested he'd taken a weekend course on how to sound profound at weddings. Sophie had pulled out her phone, which, yes, was incredibly rude during a ceremony, but we'd already crossed so many social boundaries that one more didn't seem to matter, and was scrolling through what appeared to be work emails with the focus of someone who'd completely checked out of caring about wedding etiquette. Every few seconds, she'd lean over and whisper commentary that had me struggling not to laugh out loud like an idiot. "Okay, but seriously," she murmured, her eyes still on her phone. "Does he think he's performing Shakespeare?" That last bit about 2 hearts beating as one was so cheesy I think I'm lactose intolerant now. I covered my mouth with my hand, pretending to cough to hide the fact that I was absolutely losing it. A woman in row 11, not the cologne guy, thankfully, but his equally judgmental companion, turned around and gave us a look that could have curdled milk. Sophie smiled at her sweetly, the kind of smile that said, "I see you judging me, and I literally could not care less," and went back to her phone. From what I could see around the pillar, which wasn't much, but I'd figured out if I leaned significantly to the left and craned my neck at an angle that would probably require physical therapy later, I could catch glimpses of the ceremony. Things were proceeding exactly as planned. Naomi looked beautiful in what I assumed was a dress that cost more than a small car. Preston looked like every other finance bro in a tuxedo, and everyone was dutifully playing their roles in this elaborate production of upper-class wedding theater. The officiant launched into a reading about love that I'm pretty sure was from Corinthians, because it's always from Corinthians at weddings, and Sophie leaned over again. $50, says her vows rhyme. That's a sucker's bet, I whispered back. Of course they rhyme. This whole thing is choreographed within an inch of its life. Fine. $50, says they rhyme and mention something about journeys or adventures. Deal, I said, because even though I was pretty sure she was right, the idea of having a side bet going during this ceremony made the whole experience significantly more bearable. Sure enough, when Naomi started her vows, which I could hear perfectly well through the sound system even if I couldn't see her face, she got about 3 sentences in before dropping both journey and adventure in the same breath, followed by something about 2 souls finding their way that definitely rhymed with every day. Sophie held out her hand for a fist bump, which I gave her, and the woman in row 11 turned around again, her expression now suggesting she was considering calling security. Ma'am, we're just celebrating love, Sophie said to her with perfect sincerity, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from absolutely losing it. Preston's vows were somehow even more predictable. Lots of stuff about being his best self and building a future together, with the kind of corporate speak that made me think he'd probably workshop these with his executive coach. Sophie mimed falling asleep, her head tilting dramatically to one side, and I had to look away because I was genuinely worried I was going to start laughing and not be able to stop. The thing was, without Sophie there, this would have been miserable. I'd have been sitting alone behind this stupid pillar, listening to a ceremony I couldn't see, feeling sorry for myself, and composing angry mental speeches about family dynamics and respect that I'd never actually deliver. But with Sophie providing running commentary like the world's most sarcastic sports announcer, it had transformed from humiliating into something almost fun. Sure, I was still in row 12. Sure, my wife was probably mentally drafting divorce papers. But at least I wasn't bored. The officiant moved into the ring exchange, his voice rising with practiced emotion. These rings represent an unbroken circle of love, a promise that they represent 2 months of Preston's salary and a very patient jeweler, Sophie whispered, and I actually snorted, which I tried to cover with another fake cough that fooled absolutely no one. I caught another glimpse of Clara through the gap between the pillar and someone's oversized hat. She was still staring at me with an expression that somehow managed to combine fury, confusion, and the kind of cold calculation that suggested she was already planning exactly how this conversation would go later. One of the other bridesmaids, I think it was Naomi's college roommate, was definitely whispering to her, probably asking who the woman in the emerald dress was and why her husband was sitting with her instead of literally anywhere else. Good question. I was kind of wondering that myself. The ceremony built toward its inevitable conclusion, the officiant milking every moment for maximum emotional impact. By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado and the Universal Life Church, Sophie raised an eyebrow at that, and I shrugged because honestly, half these wedding officiants got ordained online in about 15 minutes. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Preston, you may kiss your bride. The crowd erupted into applause, that kind of enthusiastic clapping that happens at weddings, even though we all know the couple has definitely kissed before. Everyone stood up again, craning to see the newlyweds walk back down the aisle, phones out to capture the moment for social media immortality. Sophie and I stayed seated. Not because we couldn't see, though we couldn't, thanks to our friend the pillar, but because Sophie looked at me with this glint in her eye that said, "You thinking what I'm thinking?" And I was absolutely thinking it. So we stayed in our chairs, and as the crowd stood and applauded and took pictures, we slow clapped. Deliberately, dramatically, like we were at a golf tournament instead of a wedding. Beautiful ceremony, Sophie said in a voice just loud enough to be heard by the people around us. Her tone absolutely deadpan. Really moved by that part where he mentioned the Universal Life Church. Brought a tear to my eye. I agreed, maintaining the same serious expression while continuing our theatrical slow clap. The way he pronounced matrimony was particularly touching. The cologne guy from row 11 turned around fully this time, his face red either from sun exposure or anger, possibly both. This is a sacred moment. Show some respect. Sophie looked at him with perfect innocence. Sir, we're applauding. That's literally showing respect. Would you prefer we not acknowledge their union at all? He sputtered, clearly not having expected a response, let alone one delivered with such unshakable confidence. His companion pulled at his arm, probably trying to prevent a scene, and he turned back around muttering something about people these days that made me feel about 100 years younger than I actually was. The newly married couple processed back down the aisle to some orchestral piece that was probably expensive and definitely dramatic, and the crowd began filing out row by row, following whatever mysterious order the event coordinator had established. We were in row 12, which meant we'd be among the last to leave, which was fine by me. I wasn't in any hurry to face the music that was waiting for me. Sophie stretched, looking completely relaxed despite having just helped me commit what was probably considered a war crime in Ashford family circles. So that was fun. Your family seems nice. They're not my family, I said, standing up as our row finally got the signal to move. They're my wife's family. There's a distinction. I noticed, Sophie said, falling into step beside me as we joined the slow procession toward the cocktail hour. The whole seating you behind a pillar thing kind of gave it away, along with the death stares your wife has been sending our way for the last 20 minutes. Yeah, about that. Don't apologize, she cut me off, navigating through the crowd with the ease of someone used to commanding rooms. I had fun. Besides, anyone who seats their son-in-law behind a pillar deserves a little chaos. Consider it my contribution to wedding entertainment. We emerged from the seating area into the open lawn where staff were directing guests toward the cocktail hour location. I could see Clara about 30 feet ahead, surrounded by bridesmaids, clearly trying to make her way toward me through the crowd. She had that look on her face, the one that meant we were going to have a discussion with capital letters, probably involving words like embarrassing and inappropriate. And what were you thinking? Sophie followed my gaze and grinned. Want me to run interference? I'm excellent at awkward conversations. I think you've done enough damage for one day, I said, but I was smiling. Though I appreciate the offer. Fair enough. She pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. I'm giving you my number. Text me if you survive the interrogation. I want updates on this situation. You're assuming there will be updates beyond she killed me and hid the body behind the decorative pillar. Even better. I'll tell the police where to look. She squeezed my arm once, a gesture that somehow felt both friendly and conspiratorial, and then she disappeared into the crowd heading toward the bar, leaving me standing alone to face whatever came next. Clara reached me approximately 15 seconds later, her smile so forced it looked like it was held in place with invisible wire. Blake, we need to talk. Hey babe, beautiful ceremony. Really loved the part where. Who is she? Here we go. Clara grabbed my arm with the kind of grip that looked affectionate to outside observers, but felt like she was trying to cut off my circulation, steering me away from the main flow of guests toward a less populated section of the lawn near some decorative hedges that probably had a fancy Latin name. Her smile never wavered. The Ashfords had trained her well in the art of looking pleasant while absolutely seething underneath, but her eyes were doing that thing where they got really wide and intense, like a predator deciding whether to eat you now or save you for later. Start talking, she said through her teeth, still smiling in case anyone was watching. Who was that woman, and why were you holding her hand during my sister's wedding ceremony? Her name is Sophie, I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was doing some kind of tap dance routine in my chest. She was sitting next to me in row 12. You know, the row you guys put me in, behind the pillar. Blake, this is not the time to be difficult. I'm not being difficult. I'm literally answering your question. You asked who she was, I told you. Clara's eye twitched slightly, which was about as close as she got to losing her composure in public. You were holding hands with a complete stranger during the ceremony. Do you have any idea how that looked? Probably looked like I had someone to sit with, I said. And okay, maybe I was being a little bit petty, but 3 years of this family's treatment and one ceremony spent behind a decorative pillar had apparently used up my entire reserve of patience. Unlike if I'd just been sitting there alone in row 12, which would have looked super great. Really sends a "we value family" message. The seating arrangements weren't personal. Clara, I was behind a pillar. A literal pillar. I couldn't see anything. Your mom seated me where people put +1s they've never met. Except I'm not a +1. I'm your husband. She glanced around quickly to make sure no one was in earshot, then leaned in closer. Can we please not do this right now? This is Naomi's day. Everything needs to be perfect. Seems pretty perfect to me, I said. She's married. Everyone's happy. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Well, except for the part where your husband was essentially erased from the seating chart. But I'm sure that was just an oversight. You're being ridiculous. And you're being... I stopped myself, because we were heading into territory that wouldn't end well for either of us. I took a breath, trying to find some version of calm. Look, I'm not trying to ruin anything. I sat where I was told to sit. I watched the ceremony I could barely see. I'm here. I showed up. What more do you want? I want you to stop making a scene with some random woman. I wasn't making a scene. We were just sitting together. And her name is Sophie, not some random woman. She was nice enough to keep me company while I experienced the wedding from the social equivalent of witness protection. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but we were interrupted by Patricia materializing out of nowhere like some kind of judgmental ghost in a lavender mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost more than my car. There you two are. Clara, darling, they need you for photos. Blake. She said my name like it was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. You're welcome to join us for the family portraits. The fact that she said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful for the permission to appear in photographs with my own wife's family, made something inside me snap just a little bit more. That's okay, Patricia. I think I'll hit the cocktail hour. Wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic. Patricia's smile got tighter. It's really not a problem. We have time for a few with extended family. Extended family. That's what I was. Extended. Like a warranty nobody wanted to purchase but felt obligated to consider. Blake, Clara hissed, her hand still on my arm. Don't be like this. I'm not being like anything. Your mom said it's not a problem, which implies it could be a problem, so I'm just removing the potential problem from the equation. You go take your photos. I'll be at the bar, probably making friends with other extended family members. I gently extracted my arm from Clara's grip and walked away before either of them could say anything else, heading toward the cocktail hour area where I could see a very promising bar setup and, more importantly, escape from this conversation. Behind me, I could hear Clara saying something to her mother in a hushed, urgent tone, but I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. The cocktail hour was set up on a different section of the lawn, this one with high-top tables scattered around and servers circulating with trays of food that looked beautiful and tasted like absolutely nothing. Seriously, rich people food is the weirdest thing. It's like they're competing to see who can make the most expensive ingredients taste the most bland. I grabbed something that might have been salmon off a passing tray, ate it in one bite, and immediately regretted it because it was definitely salmon, but somehow tasted like absolutely nothing except expensive disappointment. The bar was doing good business, which made sense because everyone needed alcohol to get through these things. I ordered a whiskey, Maker's Mark, because I'm not fancy, but I'm also not a monster, and scanned the crowd for Sophie. Found her almost immediately, because she was the only person who looked like she was actually enjoying herself instead of performing enjoyment for an invisible audience. She was standing near one of the high tops, talking to an older gentleman who looked very important and very boring, and when she saw me approaching she lit up like I was rescuing her from a hostage situation. Blake, there you are. Mr. Henderson, this is Blake Monroe, he's in architecture. Blake, this is George Henderson, he's in finance. We shook hands. George gave me the kind of assessment that guys in finance always give, trying to calculate my net worth based on my suit and watch, and then he excused himself to go network, which is what rich people call drinking while talking about money. Sophie immediately dropped the polite smile she'd been wearing and took a sip of her wine. Thank God you showed up. He was explaining cryptocurrency to me like I was 5 years old. I literally work in financial consulting. I probably understand Bitcoin better than he does. You know what Bitcoin is? I asked, taking a sip of my whiskey and immediately feeling better about life. I know it's a scam that tech bros use to feel smart. Does that count? I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from your stomach instead of just your throat. That's the best definition I've ever heard. So, she said, leaning against the high top and giving me her full attention. How did it feel to survive interrogation? You still have all your limbs, so I'm assuming it went okay. Define okay. My wife thinks I was trying to humiliate her. Her mother thinks I'm ungrateful for not jumping at the chance to be in extended family photos. And I'm pretty sure I just walked away from a conversation that's going to come back to haunt me later. Sounds like a successful cocktail hour to me, Sophie said, clinking her wine glass against my whiskey. Welcome to the rebellion. We claimed our corner of the cocktail hour like it was our personal territory, waving off servers with their tiny, tasteless food and making our own entertainment. Sophie told me about her job consulting for egotistical CEOs who thought they were geniuses but couldn't read a basic financial report. I told her about my architecture firm and how I'd gotten into it because I genuinely loved designing spaces, but spent most of my time now dealing with clients who wanted their houses to look like they belonged in magazines instead of being, livable. Do you ever get clients who want things that are actually impossible? She asked. All the time. Last month, someone wanted floor-to-ceiling windows that didn't let any light in because they didn't want glare. I was like, that's called a wall. You're describing a wall. She nearly spit out her wine. Please tell me you said that. I said it diplomatically. Something about managing solar exposure through strategic design choices. But yeah, I meant wall. You're good at the corporate speak thing. I'm impressed. 3 years married to Clara taught me how to say nothing in a lot of words. Sophie raised her eyebrows, but didn't comment, which I appreciated. Instead, she pivoted to a story about a CEO who'd asked her to find ways to optimize his personal brand, and had been furious when she'd suggested he stop tweeting at 3 a.m. about conspiracy theories. We traded stories about difficult clients and absurd requests, and somewhere in there I realized I was having more fun at this cocktail hour than I'd had at any Ashford family event in 3 years. Your wife's family, Sophie said eventually, swirling her wine glass. They're exactly the kind of people who think summer is a verb, aren't they? Oh God, yes. They summer in the Hamptons. They winter in Aspen. They fall in Vermont, apparently, to see the leaves and judge local establishments. I don't work for clients who don't pay taxes, she said, deadpan, and I almost choked on my whiskey. Jesus, Sophie. What? I'm just saying. The Ashfords strike me as the kind of family that has a lot of opinions about estate planning. She wasn't wrong. She was so aggressively not wrong that it was almost scary how quickly she'd sized up Clara's family. I was about to respond when I noticed Clara making her way toward us through the crowd. Her expression carefully neutral in that way that meant she was absolutely not neutral about anything. Incoming, I muttered to Sophie. Want me to handle it? She offered. Tempting, but probably not a great idea. Clara reached us with her public smile firmly in place, the one she used for networking events and passive-aggressive family dinners. Blake, they're about to announce dinner seating. We should probably head to the ballroom. Great, I said, finishing my whiskey. Can't wait to see where I'm sitting this time. Coat check. Kitchen. Maybe they've got a nice spot in the parking garage. Clara's smile tightened microscopically. You're at table 8. And where's table 8? It's a perfectly good table. That's not an answer, Clara. Sophie watched this exchange like it was the most entertaining thing she'd seen all day, which it probably was. Clara's eyes flicked to her briefly, then back to me. Are you coming or not? I looked at Sophie, who gave me a tiny shrug that said, your call. Then I looked at my wife, who looked beautiful and frustrated, and like she desperately wanted this day to go according to plan. Yeah, I said, I'm coming. But as we walked toward the ballroom, I glanced back at Sophie one more time. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast, and I knew, absolutely knew, that this wasn't the last time I'd see her that night. This wedding was far from over. The ballroom looked like someone had taken the concept of wedding reception and multiplied it by about $50,000. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like expensive stalactites. Each table was covered in linens so white they were probably offensive to look at directly, and the centerpieces were these massive flower arrangements that blocked your view of anyone sitting across from you, which was either a design flaw or an intentional feature depending on how much you liked the people at your table. Everything sparkled. Everything gleamed. Everything screamed, we have money and we want you to know it. The head table, where Naomi, Preston, and the wedding party sat, was on a raised platform like they were royalty holding court, which honestly wasn't that far from how the Ashfords saw themselves. That table looked like something out of a magazine spread, with dramatic uplighting and enough floral arrangements to start a small garden center. You could practically hear money being spent just by looking at it. My table, on the other hand, looked like where they put the people they couldn't quite justify excluding but definitely didn't want prominently featured. Table 8 was positioned at what I'd generously call the edge of civilization, far enough from the head table that we'd need binoculars to see anything important, close enough to the kitchen doors that we'd get to enjoy the constant traffic of servers rushing back and forth. The centerpiece was noticeably smaller than the ones on the tables closer to the action, and I counted exactly 6 place settings, which meant we were either missing people or this was just a half-populated table of misfits. I found my name card, because of course there were name cards. The Ashfords weren't going to let anything as chaotic as open seating happen, and sat down in a chair that was somehow less comfortable than the ceremony seating, which I hadn't thought was possible. To my left was an empty seat. To my right was someone named Jeffrey Patterson, who hadn't arrived yet, and across from me were 3 more empty seats with names I didn't recognize. Perfect. I was essentially sitting alone at a table for people nobody cared about, at a wedding where I was related to half the hosts. Clara had disappeared again. Something about helping Naomi with her dress or coordinating photos or any one of the 17,000 tasks that bridesmaids apparently had to handle. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check emails so I wouldn't look like the sad guy sitting alone at a wedding, which was exactly what I was but didn't need to broadcast. That's when Sophie appeared out of nowhere, holding a fresh glass of wine and looking around the ballroom with the expression of someone conducting a sociological experiment. She spotted me, grinned, and started walking toward table 8 like she owned the place. "Tell me you're not sitting here alone at the sad table," she said, arriving and looking at the empty seats around me. "Technically, there are other people assigned to this table. They just haven't shown up yet. Or maybe they saw the seating chart and faked their own deaths. I don't know. Well, that's just tragic." She looked at the empty seat next to me, then at her own wine glass, then back at me. "Switch seats with me. Sophie, you have your own seat assignment somewhere." "Yeah, at table 14, near the bathrooms and the emergency exit." "I've decided that's unacceptable." She set her wine glass down decisively. "We're going to the front." I stared at her. "We can't just go to the front. There are assigned seats. There's a whole system. Clara's mom probably has a backup seating chart in case someone tries to cause chaos." "Perfect. Let's be the chaos." Sophie was already grabbing her clutch and her wine. "Come on. What are they going to do, throw us out? This is a wedding, not a military operation. Have you met the Ashfords? Because it's definitely both." "Blake." She looked at me with an expression that was half challenge, half genuine encouragement. "You've been shoved to the back of everything all day. The ceremony, the cocktail hour, now dinner. At some point, you have to decide if you're okay with that or if you're going to do something about it." She had a point. A really, really good point that hit somewhere uncomfortable in my chest. I'd spent 3 years accepting whatever position the Ashfords assigned me, telling myself it was fine, it didn't matter, it was just easier to go along with things than to make waves. But sitting here alone at table 8 while my wife was up on the platform with her family, it occurred to me that maybe easier wasn't actually the same thing as better. "Fine," I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. "But when this goes badly." "It won't go badly. It'll go interestingly. There's a difference." Sophie was already heading toward the front of the ballroom, weaving through tables with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life and wouldn't accept it if she was. I followed her because at this point, what did I have to lose? My dignity. Already gone. My standing with Clara's family. That ship had sailed, hit an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. My marriage? Well, that was probably going to require a serious conversation regardless of where I sat for dinner. Sophie led us straight to table 3, close enough to the head table that we could actually see what was happening, far enough away that we wouldn't be immediately noticed. There were 2 empty seats, which Sophie claimed were clearly meant for us because the universe provides. One of Naomi's co-workers from her marketing job was already seated there, a woman in her 40s named Janet, who looked delighted to have company. "Oh, wonderful. Are you friends of the bride?" Janet asked as we sat down, and I opened my mouth to explain that actually I was married to the bride's sister, but had been seated in Siberia for reasons that would require a therapist to unpack. But Sophie jumped in first. "We're friends of love," Sophie said smoothly, settling into her chair like she'd been assigned there all along. "And champagne. Mostly champagne." Janet laughed, and just like that, we were absorbed into table 3 like we belonged there. Other guests started arriving. Preston's college roommate and his wife, one of Naomi's cousins from her dad's side who I'd met maybe once, and a couple who I think worked with Preston at his finance company. Everyone was friendly, making small talk about the ceremony and how beautiful everything looked, and not one person questioned why we were there. Well, except for Clara, who I caught staring at me from the head table with an expression that suggested she was mentally composing a very long list of grievances. I smiled at her and raised my water glass in a small toast. Her eye twitched. Score one for the guy who usually sat quietly and accepted his fate. The servers started bringing out the first course, some kind of salad with ingredients I couldn't identify and a dressing that tasted like someone had mixed balsamic vinegar with good intentions. Sophie leaned over and whispered, "This salad costs more than my car payment and tastes like expensive grass clippings." "At least it's expensive," I whispered back. "Imagine if it was cheap grass clippings." She snorted into her wine glass, which made the guy across from us, Preston's college roommate, whose name I'd already forgotten, look up with interest. "Not a fan of the salad?" "Oh, it's lovely," Sophie said without missing a beat. "I just have very strong opinions about arugula. It's a controversial vegetable." "It's a leaf," I pointed out. "Even more controversial." And somehow, just like that, we were integrated into table 3. People laughed at Sophie's jokes, asked me about my work when they found out I was in architecture, and generally treated us like we were supposed to be there. It was the most included I'd felt at an Ashford event in 3 years, and it was entirely because I'd broken the rules and sat somewhere I wasn't supposed to. The photographer made her way around the room, taking candid shots of tables, and when she reached ours, she asked everyone to squeeze in for a group photo. Sophie leaned into me, her shoulder pressing against mine, and I caught a glimpse of Clara watching from the head table. Her smile looked like it had been painted on with a very shaky hand. The photo flash went off, capturing what I'm sure was a beautiful image of Table 3 and their 2 uninvited guests who looked like they were having the time of their lives. Because honestly, we kind of were. Dinner progressed through multiple courses that all looked like abstract art and tasted like they'd been designed by someone who thought flavor was vulgar. There was a fish course that came with foam, actual foam, like someone had taken soap and decided it belonged on a plate, and some kind of beef tenderloin that was probably very expensive but had been cooked to the exact temperature of "we're trying too hard." Sophie provided running commentary on each course like she was reviewing them for a food magazine that specialized in rich people's questionable choices, and I had to keep taking sips of water to avoid laughing too obviously. "This foam," she whispered, poking it with her fork like it might fight back, "is what happens when chefs watch too much Food Network and not enough reality." "It's deconstructed," said Preston's college roommate. I'd learned his name was Trevor, and he was exactly as boring as that name suggested, with complete seriousness. "It's supposed to represent the essence of the sea." "The essence of the sea is salt water and dead fish," Sophie said pleasantly. "This is just bubbles with delusions of grandeur." I genuinely had to cover my face with my napkin because I was losing it. Trevor looked confused, his wife looked amused, and Janet was openly laughing, which made me feel slightly less terrible about the fact that we were essentially mocking the very expensive meal someone had paid a fortune for. From the head table, I could see Clara engaged in what looked like an intense conversation with her mother, both of them occasionally glancing in my direction like they were discussing a problem that needed solving. Which, fair enough, I guess I was a problem at this point. But here's the thing. I'd been a quiet, accommodating, invisible problem for 3 years. If I was going to be a problem anyway, I might as well be an interesting one. The clinking of glasses started as dessert was being served, some kind of deconstructed wedding cake that came in individual portions and probably cost more per bite than my hourly rate. The best man stood up, adjusting his microphone with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd written his speech on the plane ride here. His toast was exactly what you'd expect. Stories about Preston in college that were supposed to be funny, but mostly just revealed that Preston had been exactly the same in his 20s as he was now. A few jokes about marriage that had been recycled from every best man speech since the dawn of time, and a heartfelt conclusion about love and happiness that sounded sincere enough. Everyone clapped politely. Preston looked emotional in that way guys do when they're trying not to cry, but also want everyone to know they're sensitive. Naomi dabbed at her eyes with a napkin that probably cost $15. Then it was Clara's turn. As maid of honor, she got to do the sister speech, and I'll give her credit. She was good at this. Clara could work a room like nobody's business, knew exactly how to modulate her voice for maximum emotional impact, and had clearly rehearsed this speech enough times that it sounded spontaneous while being completely choreographed. She talked about growing up with Naomi, about their relationship as sisters, about watching Naomi find love with Preston and knowing it was real because of some story about how he brought her coffee every morning or something equally designed to make everyone feel things. The whole speech was beautiful, heartfelt, and managed to not mention her own husband even once. Not a single reference to her own marriage, to us, to anything that might suggest she had a partner in the room. It was like I'd been edited out of her personal narrative, deleted from her story like a scene that didn't make it into the final cut. Sophie leaned over during the applause that followed Clara's speech. Did she just give an entire toast about love without mentioning that she's married? Welcome to my life, I muttered, clapping along with everyone else because what else was I going to do? That's actually impressive in a really depressing way, Sophie said. And I couldn't tell if she was joking or genuinely sympathetic, maybe both. The speeches seemed to be wrapping up. Naomi's dad had done his father of the bride thing earlier. Preston's parents had tag-teamed something about family and unity, and now it looked like we were moving toward the cake cutting and dancing portion of the evening. I was actually relieved, thinking maybe I could survive the rest of this night without any more drama. And then Sophie stood up. She stood up, picked up her champagne glass, and tapped it with her knife. Not aggressively, but loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. My heart dropped directly into my stomach and possibly kept going straight through the floor. Sophie, I hissed, what are you doing? Something interesting, she whispered back, then raised her voice to address the room. Hi everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say something if that's okay. The room went quiet in that way that happens when someone does something unexpected at a formal event. Not quite awkward yet, but definitely surprised. The DJ lowered the music. People at other tables turned to look. Up at the head table, I could see Naomi looking confused, Preston looking mildly annoyed, and Clara looking like she was watching her worst nightmare unfold in real time. Sophie smiled, completely unbothered by the attention, comfortable in a way that suggested she'd given impromptu speeches before and would absolutely do it again. I wasn't supposed to speak tonight. I'm not family. I'm barely even a proper guest, honestly. But I've been watching everyone talk about love and commitment and what those things mean, and I wanted to add something. She paused, letting the silence build, and I swear to God I stopped breathing. What was she doing? This was insane. This was social suicide. It's really nice to see what unconditional love looks like, Sophie continued, her voice carrying across the ballroom with perfect clarity. Some people go their whole lives without experiencing it, without knowing what it feels like to be seen, to be valued, to be treated like they matter. And I think that's really sad. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words, trying to figure out where this was going. I could see people exchanging glances, could feel the collective confusion building. Sophie's smile didn't waver. So I wanted to make a toast, she said, raising her champagne glass higher. To those who still show up, even when they're made invisible. To the people who sit in the back row, behind pillars, at table 8, and still choose to be present. To everyone who's ever been treated like an afterthought but stayed anyway, because that's what real commitment looks like. She turned slightly, her glass now clearly directed toward me, her expression warm and genuine and absolutely calculated to cause maximum impact. To those who deserve better than they've gotten. Every single head in the ballroom turned to look at me. Not subtly, not discreetly. Full head turns, like I was a car accident they couldn't look away from. I felt my face get hot, felt the weight of probably 200 pairs of eyes all focused on the guy sitting at table 3 where he definitely wasn't supposed to be, with a woman who definitely wasn't his wife, receiving a toast that was definitely calling out every single thing that had been wrong with this entire day. Sophie maintained eye contact with me, still smiling, waiting for me to respond. The silence stretched out, got uncomfortable, started to become unbearable. I had two choices: sink into my chair and wish for death, or own this moment. I stood up, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone could see. I raised my water glass, because I'd finished my champagne somewhere around the foam course, and met Sophie's eyes across the 3 feet of space between us. To showing up, I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, quiet enough that it felt personal, even when nobody wants you there. We clinked glasses. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet ballroom. And then, because the universe apparently wasn't done with me yet, a few people started clapping. Just a smattering at first. Trevor and his wife, Janet, A few people from neighboring tables who either appreciated the sentiment or just felt awkward about the silence. But it grew, became something closer to actual applause, and suddenly we were having a moment in the middle of Naomi's wedding reception. Up at the head table, Clara's face had gone through several colors and settled on something close to white. Her mother looked like she'd swallowed something poisonous. Naomi looked confused and slightly annoyed that attention had shifted away from her on her special day. And Preston just looked blank, probably trying to calculate if this was going to affect the schedule. Sophie sat back down, looking extremely pleased with herself, and leaned over to whisper, "That went well." "We have very different definitions of well," I whispered back, sitting down before my knees could give out from the adrenaline. "Clara's going to kill me. Like, actually murder me. They're going to find my body in a decorative fountain. At least you'll die having been seen," Sophie said cheerfully, taking a sip of her champagne. "That's more than you had this morning." She wasn't wrong. And as the DJ quickly started the music back up, trying to move past the weird tension Sophie's toast had created, I realized something. For the first time in 3 years of being part of the Ashford family orbit, someone had actually acknowledged that I existed, that I mattered, that the way I'd been treated was wrong. It had taken a complete stranger to do it, which said something about my marriage that I probably needed to think about. But not right now. Right now, I just needed to survive whatever came next. The rest of dinner was about as comfortable as sitting on a cactus while someone read you your own eulogy. People kept glancing over at our table, not even trying to be subtle about it, just full-on staring like we were a car crash with survivors stumbling around. And the whispers had started immediately after Sophie sat down. I could practically hear the gossip mill grinding into overdrive, churning out theories about who she was, what that toast meant, and whether I was having some kind of public breakdown or an affair or both. Sophie, for her part, seemed completely unbothered by the chaos she'd created. She ate her deconstructed cake with the focus of someone who hadn't just delivered a speech that would probably be discussed at Ashford family gatherings for the next decade, occasionally commenting on the texture of the frosting or the architectural integrity of the sugar flowers. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to figure out if there was a polite way to fake a medical emergency and evacuate before Clara could corner me. Spoiler alert, there wasn't. The cake cutting happened, Naomi and Preston doing that thing where they feed each other tiny bites while everyone took photos, managing to be both adorable and vaguely threatening as Preston smashed a little bit of cake on Naomi's face in what was supposed to be playful, but looked kind of aggressive. The first dance happened, some song that was probably meaningful to them, but sounded like every other wedding slow song ever written. More photos, more champagne, more speeches from relatives who thought everyone wanted to hear their opinions on marriage despite most of them being divorced at least once. I was trying to blend into the background again. Old habits die hard. When Clara appeared next to my chair like a particularly well-dressed ghost. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there radiating fury in a way that was honestly impressive considering she was still maintaining that public smile. Sophie noticed her arrival and made a show of checking her phone, giving us the illusion of privacy even though everyone within a 10-foot radius was definitely listening. Outside, Clara said quietly, "Now." It wasn't a request. I stood up, nodded apologetically to the table even though I had nothing to apologize for, and followed my wife through the ballroom toward one of the side exits that led to a terrace overlooking the mountains. The view was probably stunning, all dramatic peaks and sunset colors, but I wasn't really paying attention to the scenery because I was too busy preparing for what was about to be a very unpleasant conversation. The door closed behind us, cutting off the music and chatter from inside, and suddenly it was just the two of us in the rapidly cooling evening air. Clara rounded on me immediately, her composure finally cracking now that we were alone. "Who the hell is she, Blake?" "I told you already. Her name is Sophie. She was sitting next to me at the ceremony. I don't care where she was sitting. I want to know why she just gave a speech about you in the middle of my sister's wedding reception." Clara's voice was getting louder, climbing toward a register I rarely heard from her. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Everyone is talking about it. My mother is furious." "Of course your mother is furious. Your mother is always furious about something I do. Last Thanksgiving she was mad because I used the wrong fork for the salad course." "This isn't about forks, Blake. This is about you making a scene with some woman nobody knows. Her name is Sophie." I said again, more firmly this time. And she wasn't making a scene. She was making a point. What point? That you're embarrassing? That you can't handle one day of being part of this family without acting like a child? Something cold settled in my chest, the kind of cold that comes right before you say something you can't take back. Being part of this family? Clara, I was seated behind a pillar. At your sister's wedding. Behind an actual pillar where I couldn't see anything. Do you know how that felt? The seating arrangements weren't personal. Stop saying that. I actually raised my voice, which shocked both of us. I never raised my voice. That wasn't my style. But 3 years of swallowing frustration and one day of being treated like human garbage had apparently reached my breaking point. Stop pretending like it wasn't intentional. Your mom seated me there because that's exactly how your family sees me. As something to be hidden away, something that doesn't quite fit the image you're all trying to project. Clara's eyes got shiny, which usually meant tears were coming, but her voice stayed hard. You're being paranoid. My mother was just trying to organize a complicated seating chart. I'm your husband. I should have been at your table, or at the very least somewhere I could actually see the ceremony. But instead, I was in row 12 behind a pillar, like I'm some distant cousin nobody likes, but felt obligated to invite. And when I asked you about it before the wedding, you said your mom was handling it, like that explained everything. Like it was fine. Blake. And at dinner, I was at table 8. Table 8, Clara. Do you even know where table 8 is? It's next to the kitchen. It's where you put people when you can't justify excluding them entirely, but definitely don't want them anywhere important. She crossed her arms, defensive now. So you decided to just move yourself to a different table? To sit with some random woman and let her make toasts about you like you're some kind of victim? I am a victim of your family's obsession with appearances and status and making sure everything looks perfect for the outside world. Do you know what Sophie said to me during the ceremony? She said I looked like I'd been banished. And she was right. Because that's exactly what your family does. They banish me to the edges, keep me just visible enough that no one can accuse them of being rude, but far enough away that I don't mess up their perfect family portrait. Clara was definitely crying now, mascara starting to run slightly, which would have made me feel guilty any other time, but right now just made me tired. This is my sister's wedding, Blake. One day, I asked you for one day of just being normal, being supportive, not making things difficult. I didn't make anything difficult. I showed up. I sat where I was told. I watched a ceremony I could barely see. I went to cocktail hour alone while you disappeared for photos. I was being exactly what your family wanted, invisible. The only difference is that Sophie actually saw me anyway. Oh my God, Clara said, her voice going sharp again. Are you sleeping with her? Is that what this is? Some kind of. No. I actually laughed, which was probably the wrong response, but I couldn't help it. No, Clara. I met her today, at the ceremony, where I was sitting alone, behind a pillar. She's just someone who was nice to me, which apparently is such a rare experience in your family that it's now being interpreted as an affair. Then why is she here? Why is she giving speeches about you? Because she noticed something that you haven't noticed in 3 years. The words came out louder than I intended, echoing slightly off the stone terrace. She noticed that your family treats me like garbage. She noticed that I was sitting alone at a table meant for people nobody cared about. She noticed that your entire speech about love and marriage didn't mention your own husband once. She noticed all the things you've been too busy performing for your family to see. Clara stepped back like I'd slapped her. Performing? Yes, performing. That's what you do, Clara. You perform being the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect Ashford family member. And somewhere in all that performing, I became just another prop in the show. Something you bring out when you need a husband for appearances, but otherwise just keep off stage. The silence that followed was brutal. I could hear the music from inside, muffled through the closed doors. Could hear the distant sound of someone laughing. Probably at something that wasn't nearly as funny as they thought it was. Could hear my own breathing, too fast, too shallow, like I'd just run a marathon instead of just having the most honest conversation with my wife in months. Clara wiped at her eyes, smearing her makeup further, and when she spoke her voice was small. I can't believe you're doing this right now. At Naomi's wedding. I'm not doing anything, Clara. I'm just finally saying what I should have said a long time ago. Your family doesn't respect me. They don't value me. And you've been letting them treat me like this for 3 years because it's easier than standing up to them. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you defended me? When was the last time you told your mother that actually, I'm not still figuring things out? I'm running a successful business. When was the last time you introduced me as your husband, like you were proud of that instead of like you were apologizing for it? She didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe she did and just didn't want to say it out loud. Either way, the silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I realized with sudden, awful clarity that we'd probably needed to have this conversation a long time ago. Maybe before we got married. Maybe on our wedding day when her mother made that comment about me being the lucky one, like Clara was some kind of prize I'd won in a lottery instead of a person I loved. I need to go back inside, Clara said finally, her voice flat. People will notice I'm gone. Of course, people would notice. God forbid the Ashfords do anything without considering what people would think. Yeah, I said, suddenly exhausted. You should go. She hesitated for just a moment, and I thought maybe, she was going to say something real, something honest, something that suggested we could work through this. But then she just turned and walked back inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I stood there alone on the terrace, watching the sun finish setting behind the mountains, and pulled out my phone. I had a text from Sophie. You alive out there, or should I call search and rescue? Despite everything, I smiled. Typed back, alive. Damaged, but alive. Her response came immediately, good. Because I think we just became the most interesting thing to happen at this wedding. Also, your wife's mom is looking for you, and she has that expression people get before they commit murder. I looked through the glass doors and sure enough, there was Patricia, scanning the ballroom with the intensity of a hawk looking for prey. Time to face the music. Again. Still. Forever, apparently. But as I headed back inside, I realized something. I'd finally said what I needed to say. It hadn't fixed anything. Might have actually broken things further, but at least I'd been honest. And somehow, that felt better than 3 years of staying quiet. The week after the wedding was one of those special kinds of hell where nobody actually talks about the problem, but everyone knows there's a problem. So you just exist in this horrible limbo of passive-aggressive silence and meaningful looks that don't actually mean anything productive. Clara and I barely spoke during the 3-hour drive back to Denver, which was impressive considering we were trapped in a car together with nothing but the radio and our mutual resentment for company. She scrolled through wedding photos on her phone, because of course everyone had already posted 75 albums worth of pictures, occasionally sighing in ways that seemed designed to make me feel guilty, but mostly just made me tired. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and I went straight to the couch, which is where I'd been sleeping for the past 6 nights. Not because she explicitly told me to sleep there, but because the alternative was lying next to someone who was treating me like I'd personally ruined her sister's wedding by committing the heinous crime of being visible for 5 minutes. The couch was fine. Uncomfortable and too short for my frame, but fine. At least it didn't radiate disappointment and judgment at me while I tried to sleep. Work was a welcome distraction. I had a residential project that was going sideways because the clients kept changing their minds about literally everything. First they wanted contemporary, then they wanted traditional. Now they were sending me Pinterest boards of modern farmhouse, which isn't even a real architectural style. It's just what happens when you let HGTV make all your decisions. But dealing with indecisive clients was still better than dealing with my marriage. So I threw myself into revisions and site meetings and anything that kept me at the office longer than necessary. I hadn't heard from Sophie since the wedding, which made sense because why would I? She'd been a random stranger who'd witnessed my family drama and decided to make it her entertainment for the evening. Fun while it lasted, but not exactly the foundation for ongoing friendship. Or so I thought, until my phone buzzed during a client meeting with a text from an unknown number. Heard your wife's family called me your mistress. That's progress. At least they remember your name. I almost dropped my phone. Excused myself from the meeting. The clients were arguing about cabinet hardware anyway. They wouldn't miss me. And stepped into the hallway to call the number back. Sophie answered on the second ring, sounding amused. Blake, glad you saved my number. Or didn't delete it immediately, which I guess is the same thing. How do you know what Clara's family is saying about you? Oh, that. Yeah, funny story. Remember how I mentioned I do financial consulting? Well, it turns out I've been working with the firm that handles Preston's company's contracts. Small world, right? Anyway, I was in a meeting yesterday, and one of the junior partners mentioned something about a wedding disaster involving the bride's sister's husband and some woman who gave an inappropriate toast. Took me about 30 seconds to realize they were talking about us. I leaned against the wall, trying to process this information. You're working with Preston's company? Not directly with Preston, thank God. But yeah, his company contracts with a firm that I consult for. It's all very corporate and boring. Except for the part where I got to hear secondhand that the Ashford family has decided I'm a homewrecker who seduced you away from your loving wife with my feminine wiles and emerald dress. That's insane. That's rich people, Sophie corrected. They can't just accept that someone called out their bad behavior. So they have to create a narrative where they're the victims and we're the villains. It's actually kind of impressive how quickly they mobilized the rumor mill. Very efficient. I rubbed my face with my free hand, feeling a headache starting behind my eyes. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. Are you kidding? This is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in months. Do you know how boring financial consulting is? I spend my days explaining to men with MBAs why their innovative strategies are actually just accounting fraud with better PowerPoint presentations. This is entertainment. Despite everything, I laughed. You're insane. I prefer chaotically helpful, but sure. Listen, I'm texting you because I thought you should know what they're saying. But also because. She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I may have overheard some other interesting things in that meeting. Things about the Ashford family that you might want to know. Sophie, what did you do? I didn't do anything. I just happened to be in a room where people were talking, and I happened to have very good hearing. For instance, did you know that your darling mother-in-law was bragging before the wedding about how she'd handled your seating arrangements? Apparently, she told several people, and I quote, "We kept Blake out of the main photos and seated him strategically so he wouldn't ruin the aesthetic." Actual words. Ruin the aesthetic. The headache got immediately worse. She said that, according to the junior partner, who heard it from his wife, who was at the bridal shower. Your mother-in-law literally told people she was hiding you because you didn't fit her vision for the wedding photos. Which, for the record, is absolutely unhinged behavior and also exactly what I suspected when I saw you behind that pillar. I should have been angry. I was angry, actually, somewhere under the exhaustion and resignation. But mostly I just felt validated in a sad way, like someone had finally confirmed that yes, the thing I'd suspected for 3 years was actually real and not just my paranoia. Blake, you still there? Yeah, I said, just processing the fact that my mother-in-law literally planned to hide me at her daughter's wedding and then told people about it like it was a reasonable thing to do. If it helps, everyone who heard about it apparently thought she was crazy. Well, everyone except the Ashfords themselves, who seem to think this is normal family behavior, which tells you everything you need to know about that family. We talked for another 20 minutes, Sophie filling me in on various other tidbits she'd picked up through the corporate gossip pipeline. Apparently, Patricia had been on a campaign after the wedding to paint me as difficult and ungrateful, telling anyone who would listen that I'd embarrassed the family by sitting at the wrong table and associating with questionable people, by which she meant Sophie, who was literally a successful business consultant but didn't have the right last name or pedigree. The best part, Sophie said, is that Preston's boss was at the wedding. He saw the whole thing, your seating, my toast, all of it, and he thought it was hilarious. Told me at the meeting that he'd never seen someone call out that kind of subtle family toxicity so perfectly. He actually asked if I'd consider doing some team-building workshops about recognizing workplace dysfunction, which, not gonna lie, I'm considering. You're going to monetize my family drama? I prefer to think of it as turning trauma into opportunity. Very entrepreneurial of me. I was laughing now, actually laughing, which felt strange after a week of sleeping on my couch and avoiding my wife. You're absolutely ridiculous. Thank you. Listen, I know this is probably a weird time for you, with your marriage and everything. But if you want to grab coffee sometime and talk about it, or just complain about terrible in-laws, I'm around. No pressure, no weirdness. Just two people who survived a wedding disaster together. I thought about it. Thought about Clara scrolling through photos at home, probably getting ready to go to her mother's house for what I'm sure would be a very productive conversation about how I'd ruined everything. Thought about spending another evening on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering when my marriage had become this thing I had to survive instead of something I actually enjoyed. Yeah, I said. Coffee sounds good. When are you free? We made plans to meet the next day at a place downtown. One of those third-wave coffee shops where everything costs too much, but at least tasted good. After we hung up, I stood in the hallway for a minute, looking at my phone, trying to figure out how I felt about the fact that the most honest conversations I'd had in the past week had been with a woman I barely knew instead of with my own wife. When I got back to the meeting, my clients had finally agreed on cabinet hardware, oil-rubbed bronze, because apparently that's still a thing people want. And I spent the rest of the afternoon working on drawings that didn't require me to think about my personal life. Architecture was predictable. You followed the codes, you made things structurally sound, you solved problems with logic and mathematics. Marriage, apparently, didn't work that way. That night, I got home to find Clara in the kitchen, making dinner like nothing was wrong, which was somehow worse than if she'd just yelled at me or thrown things. At least that would have been honest. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down by the door. "Hey, dinner in 20 minutes. Cool. I'm meeting a friend for coffee tomorrow, just so you know. After work." She didn't turn around from whatever she was chopping. Okay, that was it. No questions about who or where or why. Just okay. Like she'd stopped caring enough to even pretend to be interested in my life. Or maybe she knew exactly who I was meeting and had decided that engaging would just lead to another fight she didn't want to have. I went to the bedroom. Our bedroom, technically, even though I hadn't slept there in a week, and changed out of my work clothes. When I came back out, Clara had set the table for two, had poured wine, had even lit a candle like we were going to have some kind of romantic dinner instead of another silent meal where we both pretended everything was fine. We ate. We made small talk about her day and my day and nothing important. And the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's text, about Patricia literally planning to hide me at the wedding, about 3 years of being treated like an inconvenience that the Ashford family had to tolerate. And I thought, something has to change. I just wasn't sure yet what that change looked like, or if my marriage would survive it. 3 months later, Preston's company threw a gala. One of those corporate events where everyone pretended networking was fun instead of exhausting. Sophie texted me the invitation. Clara didn't know we'd stayed in touch, didn't know we met for coffee every couple weeks to complain about work and life and families that treated you like accessories. When I walked in with Sophie, both of us invited separately, but arriving together because why not? Clara's face went pale. We'd been doing the marriage counseling thing, making progress maybe, but this wasn't part of the script. Sophie got introduced as a strategic partner for some new corporate initiative, and when she took the stage to give a speech about recognizing unseen contributors, the irony was delicious. She didn't look at me once during the speech, but everyone else did. Afterward, Clara approached, trembling. "You're with her now?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. She seated me in the front row this time. Walking out with Sophie, laughing about corporate politics and family drama, I realized revenge doesn't need planning. Sometimes it just needs better seating arrangements.